Inspiration, clarity, confidence, and wholehearted business strategy. Welcome to Your Next Chapter, the podcast especially for women in their 40s and beyond who know that business and personal development go hand in hand. Tune in each week for marketing, mindset, and personal growth strategies, along with inspiring stories from women around the world who are creating new businesses and lives that are personally fulfilling and financially rewarding. If you're looking to create a business and life you love, you're in great company. Let's find out what will unfold in your next chapter. I'm your host, Angela Raspass, and I'm so delighted that you're here. Hey, it's Angela Raspass, the Next Chapter business mentor, and I'm so delighted that you've chosen to join me for this second episode in the Your Next Chapter podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to tune in because I know there are so many things that are undoubtedly on your plate, but it is my intention to make sure that these podcast episodes are really valuable for you. All the different people I've got lined up to speak with me in these episodes are all dedicated, just like me, to enriching your own next chapter business journey. And look, today is no exception. I had the delight of interviewing Emma Gray. Now, Emma is a multi-passionate person. She divides her attention up between three different businesses: Work-Life Bliss, 15 Minutes, and the storytelling business. Now, she's a published author, and she's been also published many times in Australian national print and online media. But all of that really goes to the side because Emma is the thing I really want you to focus on and really listen for here today is the art of storytelling and the absolute authenticity with which Emma brings to her work, and in turn is hoping to encourage you to do absolutely the same. Now, one of the things is with our next chapter businesses, we need to claim our value and we really need to tell our story. It's our story that allows us to connect with those most aligned clients and really let them know that you know where they're at, you've been there, and you know the way through. And really, that's a lot to do with getting vulnerable and getting really real. Now, Emma and I chat about so many different things, including that horror comparisonitis, which can sometimes really freeze us and stop us from moving forward in our businesses. Now, we're talking about things like how to show rather than just tell when you're writing copy and sharing your story on your About page, but also in your social media, and nurturing your clients or your audience as you're taking them forward on this journey with you. In particular, we want to be talking to our audiences as one person, and we really hone on this in this conversation. I'm sure you're going to find it really, really helpful. Now, there is a download that goes along with this. It's actually something for you to take action on after the episode, if you like. So if you're listening in your car or at the gym or somewhere like that, it's all okay. You can go back and download this guide afterwards and take action on it. So you just go to angelaraspass.com/2 download. So that's angelaraspass.com/2 download. And you'll be able to download Emma's guide to a captivating About page. So let's move forward, shall we? And I won't get you to wait any longer. Let's leap into this episode and the conversation all about authentically sharing your story with copywriting. Well, hello, Emma, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I know you've got a hectic schedule, so I appreciate that, and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Angela. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I love our conversations. It feels like a conversation with a friend, so I'm very happy to be here.
That's brilliant. And then today we also get this whole host of people who are listening into the podcast to also join the conversation, which is brilliant. So what we're going to be talking about today is the importance of storytelling when it comes to a next chapter business. Now, you and I connected quite some time ago when you were helping me with copywriting for my business, and I really started to appreciate the importance of sharing your story and bringing it into the heart, into the core of your business. And we talked about how storytelling is such a key differentiator when it comes to us creating and expanding our next chapter businesses. Could you just talk a little to that as to why storytelling is such an important part?
I think it's just such a human aspect of how we get through the world. We've been communicating through stories since the dawn of time. I mean, even think back to the cave walls that people used to draw pictures on. It was one of the earliest ways that we have ever communicated as a species. We even dream in stories at night. So we go to sleep and our brains continue to tell us stories overnight. It's such a crucial part of how we exist in the world. And I think that now that we have the advent of the internet and websites, we've got this brand new, well, not too new now, but this amazing opportunity to tell our stories in writing online. And this is the way that most of us will engage with our client base and our audience because, internet is right there. It's the first thing that people go to. It's the way that it's really become the front of shop that provides people with a glimpse into who we are and what we offer. And it's the way that we really reach people and engage with them.
That's so true, being the shop front. I mean, I think that's the beauty that we all recognise about the internet these days is the ability for us to have such reach and to impact and connect with so many people and, if you so desire, so many corners of the world. And many of us, especially in Next Chapter businesses, my community, we tend to be focusing on service-based businesses. There's a lot of people who get to a stage in life where they recognise that their own experiences can help others and they move into that type of mentoring role. And with the internet, my goodness, you can be connecting with and helping people in so many different places. But what I hear, and this is something that comes up a lot in my community, is, I'm not that special. Like, who really wants to hear about my story? It's not really remarkable. How could I really utilize that as a basis on which to build a business? What do you feel about that concept of someone's story, not being remarkable? I've certainly got an opinion, but let's hear how you feel about that.
I think we all feel that way, particularly at first. And I think there's an element of comparisonitis that goes on, particularly when we launch a business and we look around and we're usually following some pretty big names in our own industry at the time, thinking, gosh, I can never be that impressive. I mean, just recently in Australia, we've had Oprah Winfrey visit and a lot of people who have gone along and heard her story and met her, and you kind of look at somebody like that and think, well, I can never have that level of punch or that level of engagement on such a grand scale. But at the same time, I have a few friends who actually met her, went to the meet and greet, and they felt quite intimidated and nervous beforehand, as you would, because she's such a mega star. I think we have to remember that a lot of our clients are really wanting someone who's very approachable, somebody who's a bit like them, somebody who is perhaps a little bit further along the same journey that they're on. And that's actually one of the most common scenarios, is that your client is really you a few years ago. And that's where we say to be the person that you needed when you were younger. And that person doesn't necessarily have a big story, just a very authentic and realistic one. I think the stories of mine that people resonate with most are just my everyday stories, things that happen with the kids, or that sense I have of collapsing under the housework and massive piles of washing everywhere. That kind of thing makes you so real and approachable. And by telling your everyday stories, you really begin to develop that sense of engagement and sense of community with people on a real level.
Yeah, it sounds like there is two pieces to that there. There's the first one, which is the establishing who you are and sharing the story that's brought you to the point that you're at, where you can begin assisting and helping others, depending on what your business core is. And then the second part of it is, once that introduction has happened, it's that connection and that ongoing nurturing of telling those everyday stories that really builds that know, like, and trust factor that we hear about so often online. But just circulating back for a moment to what you were saying about the Oprah scenario. And she's definitely a way shower to me, quite an amazing story. But that point that you made is so true. We don't need to be some sort of mega star. I mean, it's great if you are, fantastic, but that's not the objective here. Because I think that, or my experience has certainly been, we don't necessarily want to learn from someone who is preaching from the mountaintop, like, hey, the view's great up here, up you come. It's more so someone that can come down to where we are or come along to where we are and say, I've been there. I know what it's like. I know what you're facing at the moment, and I know the way through. That to me is the real core of a next chapter business, is that we've learned from our experiences. We're really leveraging our life. And it's by sharing the story of how we are who we are today that shows that vulnerability and that authenticity that allows someone to connect with us. So it's really sharing, I guess, if you're thinking from a website perspective, as you were saying, it's what are we going to put on the about page? How are we going to introduce who we are and where we've been and where we've come to create that connection? Is there almost like a bit of a recipe that you've felt or you've developed since in your own storytelling business that helps somebody work out what will they put on that about page to forge that initial connection?
It's interesting. Something else that I love to do is I love writing fiction, and I've written a couple of teenage novels actually for my own teenagers at first, but then I sort of fell into it and loved it. But one of the things I've learnt through writing fiction is that there's this real rule that we should show, don't tell. And it's exactly the same on a website, on an about page. One of the biggest mistakes that people make is to think of their about page a little bit like a CV or a job application, and they list their skills and their qualifications and their certificates and their achievements and who they've worked with. And that's the way that they're trying to convince their audience that they ought to trust them and work with them. But it just misses the mark. Clients do want to know that you have that kind of background, but they're not going to wade through that level of detail on your about page. What they really want to feel is that you are right inside their head. So there's this amazing piece of advice from an advertising guru from at least a century ago, whose name escapes me now, but he said, you have to join the conversation that's already going on inside the customer's mind. And I think that advice is crucial, that when you're writing an about page, be thinking less about you and more about your potential clients and the person who's reading this, and join the conversation that's going on inside their head. And that the part where your story mixes with theirs is that you understand where they are, what they're going through, what their obstacles have been, because you've had that personal experience. So tell your story in a way that they'll be nodding along and thinking, she is just like me. She's ahead of me. She knows what she's doing, but she definitely understands what's going on for me right now. It's about finding that bridge between you and them and then helping them to cross over.
So I guess one of the that's such a good point there about joining the conversation in their head. So I guess one of the things to be asking ourselves when we're crafting this about page is that what are the challenges that you've overcome? Because if you can, and be talking about those, and so the reader can recognize themselves. And you That's are right. At that same time, it's that point of connection, as you're saying, that number one is that you are joining that conversation in their head. If you're focusing on almost like the top of mind problem or pain or aspiration that they have, and being able to demonstrate through those words that you've been there. And I think a really important point here, and we've talked about this in the past, is that we cannot be all things to all people. And so recognizing that by telling your story and your view, your unique view on the world and what you've learned and how you can now help, that's not going to appeal to everybody. And that's okay. I believe the About page and your website in general, it needs to attract as much as it repels, which can sound a bit odd, but you want someone to read that and to self-select, like they're in, yes, this is my people, or they're out. No, that doesn't really sound like me. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Totally. And it's very similar to the whole issue of unsubscribes on your newsletter. And I think when we first start out, we might get some people subscribing to our newsletter and then others dropping off, and it can be really hard to see those unsubscribes happen. But once you realise that's okay, I don't need people on this page or on this website or in this list who don't really want to be here, it's almost like you're cleansing and purifying the list of people that are engaging with you. And I think that that is just so important, because the closer you can get to matching their needs and vice versa, the more successful you'll become. I had an experience a few years ago. I'd started a business. I do some other work where I provide workshops and seminars for busy women talking about work-life balance and managing work and family. And when I first started that, I remember thinking, I have to get work. I have to, I've taken a big risk in leaving my previous safe job, and I have to get work. So I started taking work no matter what it was. And I remember one particular workshop I took on was how to deal with difficult people. And I was able to pull this together and deliver this, but it just wasn't me. It really wasn't my passion. I didn't enjoy it really. And that workshop was up on my website then because I'd taken the time to develop it. I thought I might as well leave it there. But all the time I was thinking, I hope no one asks for that. And I realised after a while it was a very unhealthy way for me to be running the business, to have this mix of topics and options there that I didn't actually want to deliver. So I spent one Sunday afternoon going right through the website and removing pages and workshops and offerings until every single thing that was left was everything that I love to deliver. And at first it was a bit scary, oh gosh, what's going to happen now? I'm reducing the number of people who could come along and want these services. But it had completely the opposite effect, because people then came to my website and saw a clearly defined niche, and it made all the difference to have been more specific and have actually sent people away who weren't right for me. And that's exactly the same as any of the writing you do on your page in terms of your about page. And it is repelling people, but in a good way. We should try and think of another word for that, but but it's exactly right. It's true.
Yeah, and I find that what you just said there about becoming clearer about who you're here to serve and the way in which you want to, that then means that the clients that do respond to the marketing messages and the stories you have on your site are far more aligned with you. And so the experience that you have is far more pleasant for you as a service provider. It's better for them as the recipient of the service, and you do your best work when you're doing what you love. So it all starts from that. Well, first of all, the homepage, obviously, when people get there and they get that very first taste of, is this my style? Is this the sort of thing that I'm looking for? And we know from looking at statistics that the next page that people go to is the about page, so continuing the story there. And I know this is, which happens with all of my episodes when I'm interviewing, is that we have a resource that comes along, and the resource and the download that Emma's providing us in this particular episode, for everyone who's listening, is how to actually write your about page. And there's some really good questions in this particular resource that help you work out what are the things to include and how to actually help it to flow. So it does read a bit like a story rather than the CV, as you were saying. So,
that's right. Think of it more as closer to fiction, although, of course, you're telling the truth, but closer to fiction in style. So you've mentioned already that people have certain obstacles that we've all overcome. There's also usually a big pivotal climax point in our lives where we just knew that something had to change. That was it. That was the moment. And from then onwards, we did things differently. If you can work out what that moment was for you and include that on your about page, it's really good, because most of the time when people have come to your page, they're already at that moment in their own lives. They're at the point of needing help. And if you can articulate that you understand how that feels, and while you're telling how you felt, they're nodding along and thinking, that's exactly how I feel, that's exactly where I am, then you lead them gently onwards into what happened next, how you rebuilt your life, how you overcame that problem, whatever it was that you did and that you now offer. And they really come along with you on your journey and start to feel safe in your company and start to trust you.
That's such an important point, that when people find you, it's because they are in, well, what I refer to as their buying cycle. That buying cycle has many steps along the way. We start with not even being aware that we have, an issue, a problem, a challenge, a desire. Then we become aware, but we're not doing anything about it yet, to we're aware and we're willing to do something about it. And then after that, we move into the research stage, which is when people are like, we've all done it. It's something you're trying to solve, you Google it. It's part of the vernacular now. So if they find your page, and yes, as you're saying there, if you can craft that story so that they feel heard and they feel like, oh my God, this person is exactly where I was. They get it. That is that joining the conversation in their head. So we're really saying that this page needs to be written in the first person, like you're speaking directly to the reader, correct?
Absolutely, yes. They do not want to be reading a professional CV, even though you may have a link to yours, depending on what you offer and, who your target market is. You may include that somewhere on your down lower on your page. It's really about here I am, this is where I come from, here's how I can help you. And that will be told through, going back to what I said before about show, don't tell, that fictional kind of approach. I say fictional, let's change that to creative writing approach. When I say fictional, it makes me sound like I'm encouraging you to make up stories about yourself that's not true. But so you take that creative writing approach of showing them rather than telling them what you can do.
And how does that, Emma, another question that's come up with some of my people who are in my community in the past is that, okay, I get that if I'm speaking one-on-one, like if I'm a coach talking to someone who wants, a nutrition coach, a health coach, talking to somebody who wants to improve their diet and their feeling of energy. But what if I'm talking to, rather than individuals, I'm wanting to attract and work with businesses? Can I really speak in the first person? Shouldn't I have a more professional approach than that? That's definitely a question that I've heard come up. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I still think that regardless of who you're speaking to, they're a human being, and the fastest way to reach them and engage with them is by speaking to them in the first person and joining the conversation that is in their heads, which is different from the conversation that would be in an individual's head perhaps, but a business person who has an unhealthy workforce, for example, so you're still a nutrition coach, but you're aiming to do workshops in a business. That's an example.
Yep.
They're still dealing with real people problems. They've got people who are not as productive as they could be. They're sick. They're having too much sick leave. They're not engaging at work. Their sales are down. All those problems are still felt at a personal level. So it's just a matter of remembering again, who am I speaking to here and what are their challenges? Where do they want to be? How can I get them from A to B? All the same things. Just always remember who is reading this. And again, it's kind of, I was saying in our chat before we did this session, Angela, that I had an experience a few years ago where I had to go on the radio to promote my book, and I was absolutely petrified, so petrified that I had to invite one of my closest friends over to sit with me while I had my radio interview. It was really quite pathetic now looking back on it. But what I realised after a few times of doing this was that I didn't have to appeal to thousands of people who might be listening. I had to just remember I'm speaking to one person here, the interviewer on the other side. And in getting back to that natural human interaction style, I sounded much more, approachable. I sounded probably more articulate because I wasn't thinking, how should I sound right now? It was much more personal than that. And the same goes for our websites now.
That's such a good point. I think checking in with yourself when you've written. So in the first instance, get into that intentional space. We were talking about that word before as well. Get into that intentional space of envisaging this one person that you are writing for, this one person who is facing this particular challenge or has this particular aspiration they're wanting to reach, and really pausing before you begin to write and almost trying to get under their skin, as you were saying. What's the conversation that's going on in their head? So then reading back through what you've written and think, would I talk like that?
And reading it out aloud is a good point too, so that you can listen to yourself. I think we get stuck in the mindset of, but that's not how I was taught to write at school, or that's not how I wrote in my previous career in a corporate environment. And that's good, because we don't want to sound corporate like that. We don't want to sound like we're submitting an essay. We want to sound like a person speaking to someone else. So write it down and then read it out and see how it sounds.
Yes, and then if there's language or in there that feels a bit clunky in your mouth, then it's probably because it's not the way that you would normally speak. So that would change that tone and that style of the way that you're writing the page. No, that's really good advice. And as we said in the download, there's some other questions that we'll pose so that you can get yourself into that space of what it is to be including on the page. So let's go forward for a moment and think, okay, I've written my about page and my website's up there. I'm starting to get that visibility out there in the world. Now I need to craft on an ongoing basis. I mean, social media is a large part of our businesses these days, and is newsletters. So what the heck do I write about in those? So it's, so we're building relationships with our audience, but I know that an expression that you use here longer term is to think of ourselves as story catchers when we're approaching how to craft connecting prose, I guess, as a way of looking at it on an ongoing basis with our audience. Can you talk to us about what gets us into that mindset of a story catcher and what we actually do and what it actually is?
Mm-hmm. The dream catchers that you see hanging up, it's that kind of idea, and I just like that visual that everywhere we go, even in our own homes, but also everywhere we go, shopping centres, parties, school events, whatever it is, there are stories all around us. And the simplest tool that you can have is a notebook and pen. Just take it with you, and when you hear a great story, see something, hear a joke or a quote, or somebody tells you even overhear something at the bus stop, write it down and just keep a log of all the types of I call them hooks. So it's a hook that can potentially be worked into either a blog post or a newsletter article or a Facebook post or a tweet or even a podcast. So I think that's the other point too. We don't naturally all like writing, and I completely understand that. Some people are much better talking. So as long as you're interacting through video, vlogging, blogging, podcasting, whatever it is that's your style, it's still all storytelling. So the idea really is to collect this bank of inspirational bits and pieces and then tie each of those to something where you can demonstrate your expertise. So, for example, if you're somebody who works in helping parents teach their babies how to get to sleep, you might be sitting in a cafe and you might overhear two young mums talking about how much coffee they were going to need to order to get through the day because they had such an awful night the night before. And you could potentially start a blog post just with that little hook of something relevant, I was sitting in a cafe yesterday and I overheard these mums, and then you move on to your expertise or your advice or 5 points, 5 tips or whatever it is that forms the rest of your piece. And I think that's what it's all about, just capturing that little interesting snippet and then tying that to a piece of the delivery of a piece of expertise. And I think you do that here on these podcasts. You do it in your blog posts. I see you doing it all the time, Angela, really brilliantly. And I think it's once you start looking for these stories, you find them everywhere. And it's also great because people think, I haven't got enough content, where I'm going to get all these ideas. And when we realise that we don't have to only tell our own stories, we can provide observations of things we hear and see around us, then it just widens that net for the story catching.
Oh my goodness, it does. And see, there's an attitude piece there which we can grab and hold on to, and that's the concept of sharing. It doesn't have to be, like as you just said there, the pressure on us to actually think, well, I've got to come up with stuff all the time. Instead, to shift that focus to one of openness and awareness of what's going on around you. I think it happens more easily in 2 ways. The first one was when you become really aware of what it is that you stand for and you believe in, and the parts that are important to you. And I have an example of this in a moment. That helps as a really important first step. And the other side of it is recognizing that our audience is hungry for hearing stories of I'm not alone. Like there's other people that are in this too. I mean, that's, the feeling of isolation can hit a lot of us business owners when we're working at home by ourselves. Well, it hits our readers and our audiences as well. I think I'm the only one who has this challenge or this problem or this particular angle on it. So those two pieces can really, if you keep those in the forefront of your mind, can help you find the story. So an example, I really believe that one of my isms is that enthusiasm is currency. So if you are doing what you're passionate about, you've got to bring strategy and effort underneath it, obviously. But in the first instance, doing what you love and being excited about it is very, very attractive and captivating to your audience. So I was off shopping the other day trying to find a present for my sister's new partner and was nervous as, you've got to find a good gift. This is, he's really important to her or she's really important to him. He's coming into our family, etc., etc. Knew not much apart from the fact he loved to cook. So I went into a kitchen shop. And I'm not a cook. These kitchen shops are like like foreign places, like crossing the border into an unknown scenario. But the woman who descended upon me in the store went, the classic, how can I help you? And I said, well, this and this and this, and I'm a bit stuck. And she just went, oh my God, I have got the perfect thing, and was so utterly enthusiastic and wrapped me up in her care and her expertise. And she took me off and found this perfect thing. Long story, but I took that and I brought it back into a blog post, because to me it was the perfect example of enthusiasm being currency, because I didn't have to go anywhere else. She had me at hello, as they say. And if I hadn't had that mindset that you have helped me develop as I'm a story catcher, not necessarily a story creator, but a story catcher, then there's things that are happening around you all the time. And I love that way that, as you said, Emma, you can just take the beginning part, and that can be the beginning of your blog post or your audio or your video. So it's just that introduction piece that then allows you to demonstrate your expertise. So I go everywhere with a pad and pen. Never leaves my handbag.
Good to hear.
So that's great advice. And I guess the essence of social media these days is sharing. So it's getting out there and sharing those stories.
That's right. And also there are a whole lot of things on social media that you can share from other pages, for example. I shared something last night that I didn't agree with, and I said, I don't agree with this, and then said why. And it was a talking point then led into a conversation below that in the thread with a whole lot of people that were in yes or no, or here's what I think. And I really, we don't have to come up with our own original content all the time. It is very much sharing, but adding to.
And it's prompting that conversation, isn't it? That's what we really want. We want the interaction. If we can create that interaction where people are having a conversation, that's where the trust and the connection really comes from, which I think is so exciting. This whole storytelling scenario is just such an important one as we're building our businesses. And I guess I got to say, it's another reason why I've invited you, and I'm so happy you've accepted the invitation to come down to the event that I'm running in March in Sydney. Now, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, guys, it may or may not be before or after when Your Next Chapter Live is happening in Sydney on March 8 and 9. But there'll be lots of things on the website if you're listening to it afterwards that you'll be able to access resources from that event. But for those hearing this before March the 8th and 9th, Emma, what's a sneak preview? What are we going to learn when we have you in front of us and talking to us about this whole copywriting caper, this whole storytelling caper? Can you give us just a little sneak peek?
I think it's easy to talk. It's easy for me to talk about storytelling, copywriting, about pages, etc. But what you really need to do is see examples of things that work and don't work. So I'll be taking you through the anatomy of a great about page and showing you what not to do and what to do, and then giving you some tools so that by the end of that session you'll have a draft of your own, either refreshed about page or a new about page for your business. And you'll also learn there's another 5 or 6 ingredients that I would put on an about page that I haven't had time to talk about today, which I think really help to draw your readers in and encourage them to explore your website more deeply and ultimately engage with you and purchase from you. So we'll go through all of that in much more detail, and also I'll just help people to craft their story, especially those people who think they're not special or don't have a special story. Try to debunk some of those myths and help you see exactly what you have to offer and how to express that.
And I love that feeling. That whole concept of, and I want everyone to really let this land, is that your story, your experience has absolute value. I know myself, when I've been in challenging situations in the past, which is a lot what my story is based on in my own website and my own business, if there had been someone who came to me at that stage and said, I get it, I've been there, there is light at the end of the tunnel, or there is an easier way, or here's a shortcut, or here's a way through, there's a pothole, come around here and avoid it. It just would have made life so much easier. So it doesn't matter what business you're in, what service you're in, there is always people who can benefit from your approach, from your experiences. And I love the fact that we will be focusing on that at the event to really help people understand the value of what they have to offer, because we're all unique and we definitely have an audience that's waiting for us.
And I can't wait to hear those stories. I love talking about this stuff. And when we get a group of people together all sharing their own stories, it's just magical. There are usually some tears, but good tears.
Yeah, definitely good tears. Therapeutic tears for sure. Well, this has been, as always, a fantastic conversation with you. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. And for our listeners that want to come and find out more about you and the storytelling business and the things that you get up to, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
They can find me on my website, which is thestorytellingbusiness.com. Or if they'd like to see an example of how I like to communicate on Facebook, they could find me at Work Life Bliss, all one word, on Facebook, and have a look at the way that I try to build community and tell stories and increase engagement on there.
Yeah, it's a wonderful Facebook page. I love watching your adventures and taking part in the conversation that you create there as well. Well, thank you again, Emma. I've really loved this conversation, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thanks, Angela. It's my pleasure.
And for everyone listening, in the show notes back on my website, you'll find a lot more detail about what Emma and I have spoken about here and the links through to her website and to the Facebook page. And, of course, for you to download the resource from today that will help you get started on your About page, whether you're starting from scratch or whether you're feeling this desire to realign yourself because your next chapter is now becoming more obvious to you, the new direction that you want to move in. And you feel that perhaps your story, there's another layer that you can now bring out and share with your own audience. It's such an important part of you crafting and positioning yourself in the market, but also making those connections with those most aligned clients that you are really here to help. So I hope today's podcast, this episode, has been helpful for you. Thank you for investing your time and listening, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode. This is Angela Raspass. Have a lovely day. Thanks for listening to the Your Next Chapter podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please let me know. Pop over to angelaraspass.com to subscribe to the show and leave a review. And whilst you're there, you can also enjoy valuable free resources, including show notes and downloads, along with the Next Chapter community, where you can connect with other wholehearted women on the same journey as you. We'd love to welcome and support you as your next chapter unfolds. See you next time.